This is the Venturing Angler Podcast. I'm Tim Harden. In this episode, we'll be chatting with Jeff Perin of the Fly Fisher's Place in Sisters, Oregon, about fly fishing Central Oregon out of Sisters. Let's chat with Jeff. Okay, we're here with Jeff Perin of the Fly Fisher's Place out of Sisters, Oregon. Jeff, welcome to the Venturing Angler Podcast.
Hey, Tim, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So prior to hitting record, we were chit-chatting. I've been up to your area once. It's absolutely gorgeous. For those who are unfamiliar with where Sisters is, how would you describe it?
Yeah, well, Sisters is a little bit west of Bend, Oregon. A lot of people from around the country know where Bend is. It's oftentimes written about in travel magazines and sometimes in top 10 places to relocate. So it's kind of a realtor's dream. But on the other hand, it's still, certain parts of Bend still have a very quaint feel of kind of a ski area town and a golf and biking and fishing destination. But to my mind and my view and in my heart, Sisters is even better because as you move west, you get a little bit closer to the mountains that kind of define our region, the Cascade Range, and we can see about 10 or 11 snow-capped peaks plus many buttes and kind of a rising ridgeline from where we live up into the high country. We're in I'm looking out my window right now into the deep forest of ponderosa pines. Sadly today, whatever day it is, I guess it's the 28th of June. We're in a kind of an unprecedented heat wave around here, and it is just hotter than hell. It's already 100 degrees, and it's just 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It's supposed to reach 108 today. So that's very uncommon for this region. We typically do get some hot weather in the summer, and then just over the mountains from us, a short drive is the Willamette Valley. On our way down to the Willamette Valley is the beautiful McKenzie River, where we do a lot of guide trips. And that area is typically known to be an area that's a lot cooler than we are here in the high desert. Although we're more of the forest, Bend is more of the high desert. It's just a spectacular place with a lot of spring creeks, tailwater rivers, freestones, tons of lakes and reservoirs. Honestly, it is a really, really great fly fishing destination.
For those who are traveling to your area, what airports are nearby? What's the general route people might be taking from the various directions?
Yes. So it's pretty easy to get to this area now. There's a lot of direct flights into Redmond, Oregon, from Portland and Seattle, San Francisco, Denver, even direct flights from Vegas, and I think now from Phoenix, Arizona. So it's getting easier and easier to get here with more and more flights. So Redmond is about a 30-minute drive from us here in Sisters and about a 20-minute drive into Bend. So that kind of makes a triangle. Highway 97 is the main corridor coming up from California. It goes through Bend and into Redmond. And then Highway 20 from Bend goes into Sisters. And then Highway 126 goes from Sisters to Redmond. So if you kind of imagine the little triangle of connecting points where all those highways connect, Redmond is the hub of that with the airport.
Earlier you mentioned a few rivers. What you have a lot of water around you. What's there? What's around?
Well, I think for us in Sisters, we're so lucky that we have one of Oregon's finest spring creeks. I mean, arguably, people from other areas might say, "Well, our spring creek is better," but I don't know, man. It'd be pretty hard to argue that the Metolius River, which is about 20 minutes outside of Sisters, isn't one of the finest spring creeks in the West, let alone in the state of Oregon. So the Metolius has about a 12-mile long fly fishing only section. Overall, it's about 26 miles from the headwaters down to Lake Billy Chinook, where it confluences with the Deschutes River. And the section above Bridge 99 up to the headwaters is fly fishing only. It has tremendously good hatches, everything from green drakes, which hatch twice a year. They start in early to mid-May and kind of peak usually about this time of year. They're done until fall, and then we get a second hatch of them again in September. Big flies, lots of fun, great takes. I mean, friends and I, we talk about the drake take. Did you see any drake takes? Which just means that you're there kind of in that hatch time, and maybe you're not seeing a ton of duns on the water, nothing too much flying in the air, but suddenly the water just erupts in these explosive takes, right? And it's like, wow, that fish definitely just ate a drake emerger. And you know that at that moment, it's moments away from really happening, and it's time to put on a Quigley Film Critic or some kind of an emerger pattern. And shortly thereafter, you'll be fishing sparkle duns and Neely's green drakes and parachute drakes and stuff like that. It's probably my very favorite hatch. But if you kind of move through the Metolius through the seasons, there's always interesting dry fly fishing. Between pale morning duns throughout the summertime. Blue-wing olives continue to hatch in the summer, but of course they're more well known in fall, winter, spring. You got mahogany duns out there a couple of times a year, particularly in the fall. Tons of caddis, 5 or 6 different species of stoneflies. So it's kind of a dry fly paradise, particularly at certain times of the year. But it's also a spot where it's pretty well known that the guys that go down there and chase bull trout with their bigger rods and big streamers, articulated streamers, and not uncommon to pick up bull trout that'll go 6 to 15 pounds, with occasional fish running even bigger than that. So it's a really popular fishery for kind of that guy that likes to fish the meat, and also guys like me that are really into kind of that selective trout, delicate, long leader, pinpoint casting, going through 10 or 12 flies in an afternoon, trying to figure out just the right fly for one fish. I get off on that. That's my ultimate fly fishing day, is that right there.
Yeah, I didn't realize when I went to the Metolius that it's a more challenging river. And so when I got there, it looked like endless amounts of just perfect fly fishing water. And knowing that there were bull trout there, I couldn't have been more excited, and then got it handed to me. Not realizing that it's a bit more of a challenging river than others.
It is. And, the interesting thing, though, Tim, is, the river is easily broken up into 3 distinctly different sections. So that the headwater section we call the upper river, from where the river literally flows out of a spring, out of the side of a hill right below the base of Black Butte, which is almost a 7,000 foot, 6,600 foot tall butte. This perfectly symmetrical pine covered butte just looms over the area to the south, I guess, of the river there, where it comes out of the ground. And that area up there, the river's still pretty small until it takes on a couple of tributaries. The first major tributary being Lake Creek, and then Spring Creek. Once it gets past those 2 tributaries, the river definitely takes on some more volume and changes in character somewhat. But I would say that upper river, even above Spring Creek, or even slightly below Spring Creek up to the headwaters, is way easier fishing for the first time or first time guests to the Metolius, first time angler over there. Also, people that maybe don't have quite the technical experience that they might need to kind of go into the middle and lower rivers, where the fishing just gets a lot tougher because of the clear water and extremely difficult currents and very cold water. So to put it in perspective, the Metolius River, at one time, nobody's ever really come up with a firm number, but it's been kind of agreed upon within the angling community, and also with the local fish biologists at the Forest Service, that there are probably around 600 to 700 trout per mile in the Metolius. You put that in perspective to the lower Deschutes, which is also near us, about 3,500 trout per mile. And you go over to the Crooked River, which is another place that we guide about an hour east of us. That's about 5,000 trout per mile. the Metolius has a pretty low fish, head count per mile compared to the other streams. But what it does have is a completely wild trout fishery, extremely interesting hatch activity, and fish that, kind of take up residences in places that you would expect to find them in water that they're not competing against a lot of brothers and cousins. They get into those softer eddies, they get into the pools, and they're super, super selective to the hatch. So, if you think you're going to go over there and fish an Adams, or, an Elk Caddis and catch a bunch of fish, you might, but you probably won't. You got to go with more, the emergers and the cripples, and, light tippets. 6X is pretty average for most of the small flies. A 12-foot leader is kind of on the short side, but is doable. It's just that kind of fishery. So, I don't know whether you ever read Kelly Gallup's book, Cripples and Spinners, but that is the type of, book that somebody that fishes the Metolius should kind of get into. In fact, that book and John Judy's book called Slackline Fishing or Slackline Fly Fishing are probably two of the most influential books for somebody that's going to fish any spring creek, but particularly the Metolius. It's really important to have a soft line, great drift, and then the right fly that looks like it's in transition, that looks like it's not going to make it very easily off the surface.
And John Judy, he's from that neck of the woods, correct?
He formerly is from that neck of the woods. He moved up to Washington at one time before I owned the Fly Fisher's Place in Sisters. He was one of our guides there and helped out in the shop. I think even managed the shop for a few years when the Teals used to own the store. He's written a couple of books. He wrote one book called Seasons of the Metolius, another book called Slackline Fly Fishing. I don't think that either are in print anymore, but both would probably be found on the used market. And for anybody interested in the Metolius, I highly recommend both.
Great. You mentioned a couple of others, but I'll let you go ahead and take the path that you want to take to describe other area waters up there. What else is within reach?
Yeah, so the Deschutes River is something that we're really lucky to have here nearby, and in some cases nearly in our backyard. The Deschutes is a 230-mile long river, so from any given point, it could be quite a big difference between what we would refer to as the upper river and the middle river and the lower river. The lower river is what really gets most of the attention. It gets a steelhead run. Used to get a really great steelhead run, as you know, throughout the West, particularly in the east side of the Cascade Mountains. The Columbia River tributaries are just not getting the steelhead that we once got, and the 10-year average is just the bar just kind of keeps going down and down and down. And it's really sad. At one time in my lifetime, I was a really, really passionate steelhead fisherman. I was one of the first people on the Deschutes to own a spey rod. Didn't know what the heck I was doing with it, but thought it was the wave of the future, and sure as heck it became the wave of the future. Can remember days that we were hooking almost 20 steelhead a day. Certainly not landing that many, but touching that many fish in a day. And it's just isn't that way anymore. But there are still days that it could be quite good for steelhead. Even starting in July, once this heat wave ends and we get back to some more normal weather, the first steelhead of the season will start poking up from the Columbia River and coming into the Deschutes, making their anywhere from 20 to 100-mile trek upriver to find spawning grounds that they'll spawn in over the winter. But the real, to me, the real sweet spot of the Deschutes is the trout fishing. I guess because I've become, less and less interested in steelhead as they become more rare, but also as the crowds for steelhead got to be a little bit more than I wanted to compete with, and things. I just love the trout any place. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's one of the local lakes or it's the Deschutes or the Metolius. To me, a wild trout in Oregon is one of the best things ever. And that area from Warm Springs down into the Maupin area, about 40 miles of river, particularly Warm Springs down to Whitehorse Rapids. The water stays really cold from the tailwater of the reservoir up above. Has tremendously great caddis hatches. In fact, the Deschutes might be the best caddis hatch river in Oregon. It brings up a lot of fish to the surface, and of course, not all of them eat on the surface. So, at different times of the day, you might be fishing pupa patterns. Besides that, in the summertime, you'll see a lot of pale evening duns close to dark, where a big yellow sparkle dun or even a big purple haze works terrific on the surface. Tail morning duns, depending on the weather, could hatch in the morning, usually in the afternoon, but in heat like this, they usually come out at dusk. And then, the famous salmon fly hatch on the Deschutes, which is, I mean, it's nuts how crowded it gets, but it's also pretty amazing, because there's not a lot of salmon fly hatches around the world that last as long as they do on the Deschutes. This year we had salmon flies the last 3 days of April, and they lasted the entire month of May and into early June. So to see a salmon fly hatch kind of have that longevity over a wide swath of water, instead of just like a few days in this 5 to 10 mile stretch, and then 4 or 5 more days in the next stretch upriver, and then 4 or 5 more days in the next stretch upriver. They're just kind of all over on the Deschutes for a long period of time. It does bring the crowds. A month ago on the Deschutes, our shuttle drivers were driving, 50, 75, 90 shuttles a day, and now they're just running a few. So I like this time of year when the salmon fly madness goes away, the crowds go away, and you can go down there on a particularly Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and almost have the river to yourself, particularly if you're willing to do like a little bit later start time, maybe put in at 11 or 12 in the afternoon and fish until dark, which is just magical. That magic time in the evening, they call it the magic hour on the Deschutes. I'm sure it's called that on a lot of rivers, but that time at dusk, when the sun finally kind of peaks behind that last canyon wall, depending on where you're orientated in the river, and oftentimes the light turns kind of rosy, the caddis really start to roll, or the pale evening duns really start to roll, and it's dry fly fishing like you can't even believe.
Yeah, I've dreamt of fishing those hatches for a long time, and they just sound incredible.
Yeah, they are. This is a neat time of year to be here, but really Oregon, this part of Oregon has some pretty special year-round fishing. But for me, I really get pretty darn pumped up about the fishing between about, first to mid of April, and going into kind of Halloween, maybe a little bit longer than that. Like last year, I think I ran my last guide trip on November 7th. And we were up on one of the mountain lakes, fishing for big brown trout that were preparing to spawn. So it can go late. I can also remember going to some of the lakes in kind of earlier to mid-October, and finding them partially iced over. So you just, you never know from year to year. It's always different, but for sure, well into October here, we have a lot of great fishing. And down on the lower Deschutes, I mean, we're talking, down in the Warm Springs area. I think Warm Springs is, here in Sisters, we're 3,100 feet elevation above sea level, and Warm Springs, which is about an hour and 10 minutes away, is about, I think, 1,500 or 1,600 feet above sea level. So fishing goes for a long time into October and well into November. I mean, we've had some snowstorms down there in November before, where we had some steelhead trips that were a little iffy, maybe a camp trip even still that was a little iffy. But yeah, it's a neat time of the year to be down there too in the fall. And it doesn't, the trout fishing on the lower Deschutes, on waters adjacent to the Warm Springs Indian Reservation, actually closes on October 31st on Halloween. But on the BLM side of the river, which is the east side of the river, where the tribal side is the west side of the river, you can access anything east of the main channel and fish that until December 31st. So it offers a lot of good steelhead fishing, kind of late into the season. If the weather's conducive, it can be a really, really good time to find some of those late runners that come in, kind of come in a little bit later these days because they're looking for cooler water.
Okay, so beyond the lower Deschutes, what else do you have nearby?
Yeah, so besides the Metolius, there's one other pure spring creek in the area that is as a fishable spring creek. There are others too, but there's a river called the Fall River. It's actually the river that I consider the place that I learned how to fly fish. Not the first place I ever went fly fishing. That was actually on the Deschutes. But the place where when I got my driver's license and my buddy Carrie and I from high school went out there in my old Datsun truck and dude, we fished it up almost every afternoon. And it's just a really cool, very cool spring creek. I can remember bringing a friend of mine from Switzerland. He lived there. He lived in Yearround, Switzerland, and eventually moved to Vallejo, California, due to a marriage that didn't last. But I remember bringing him to the Fall River for the first time, and he seriously just walked around sort of on cloud nine with a smile on his face, thinking that it was kind of the coolest river he'd ever seen in his life. You can cut this part out if you want, but he told me, Jeff, all I want to do is just sit here and masturbate. Fucking sicko. Anyway, I tell you,
sorry to interrupt, but you the only thing I know Vallejo for, and this is, I'm sure, going to irritate some listeners, is the Zodiac killer. So now I'm starting to put people.
I don't think my friend Hans was part of that crew,
okay.
But yeah, ooh, thank God. But anyway, he ended up moving to Bend and work with me at the first fly shop job that I had for a while, and ended up getting a girlfriend that was the bartender at the French restaurant in Bend. And I kind of think that's why the marriage in Vallejo didn't work out. But he and I had a great trip one time in 1988. No, it was 1989. I went to Yellowstone in 87, 88, 89, and 87 was my first trip. In 88, I went back with my grandpa, and in 1989, I went back with Hans. Fished for a week out there. Had the time of our lives, fishing all over the place. But anyway, I digress. So the Fall River is a really, really neat spring creek, much smaller than the Metolius, where the Metolius is 100% catch and release wild trout fishery. They stopped stocking the Metolius back in, like, I think it was 95. It was, yeah, because we had a big flood in Oregon in February of 96, and from that point on, there was never any more hatchery fish in the Metolius. It just washed them out, just cleaned the river for good. So anyway, the Fall River is a spot where it definitely has the hatchery fish, but some wild fish mixed in, brookies, browns, probably a few rainbows that are actually wild trout. But it's a really neat kind of 10-mile long spring creek, about 8 of it public water, and really, really pretty. Kind of a lot smaller river, more quintessential spring creek look than the Metolius, where the Metolius gets to be a pretty brawling, almost freestone looking river. The Fall River kind of keeps that spring creek look of sort of placid water with occasional riffles or falls here and there, but it's kind of the perfect spring creek. Then I kind of mentioned the Crooked River a little bit earlier. It's a tailwater river about an hour and 15 minutes east of Sisters. From the Bend area, there's a shortcut, some back roads that go over the dam and cut down into the river canyon from there. Probably about a 40-minute drive for a lot of people that live in Bend or vacation in Bend. Really easy to get there. Probably our most prolific trout population in Central Oregon anyway. And then we have the McKenzie, which is about 45 minutes to an hour and a half away going westbound. Last year, it saw some devastating losses and some big forest fires. A lot of people may remember that Oregon had some incredibly tough forest fires starting on Labor Day last year. We were really concerned, to see, because on September 7th was the last time that we fished the McKenzie in 2020, and we were really concerned about what we would find in 2021. And while the view has changed, and there certainly a lot of those pretty cabins and things that used to be along the river are gone, the fishing is not gone. In fact, the fishing is very, very good, as good as it ever was. So we were really, really fortunate, and felt very lucky to see that the McKenzie did so well throughout the fires. We have another stream just a little bit west of us called the Santiam. There's actually a north and south fork of the Santiam. The North Fork, not too far from us, about a 45-minute drive away. It's a pretty darn good trout fishery. The problem is it runs right beside a major highway, Highway 22, coming from Salem, which is our state capital, down into Sisters. So it's a little annoying with the traffic noise, but some people are used to that, just depending on where they're coming from, and they don't mind it. And it is a good enough fishery that you can kind of overcome that traffic noise and focus on the trout and whitefish that you can catch there. And then I don't know if how much you follow the Fly Fishers Place on my social media presence or anything like that, Tim, but if you do, that I spend a lot of time on the still waters here, and in fact I do the majority of our guide trips through the fly shop on the lakes, where we have a crew of about 10 guides that work all over Central Oregon. I spend 100% of my time on the lakes, so when I'm guiding. And we have a ton of good lakes. There's a fly fishing only lake called Hosmer, which is up in the mountains right behind the Mount Bachelor ski area. Just down the road from that is Crane Prairie Reservoir, about a 4,000 acre body of water with an average depth of 11 feet. So it's just a giant shoal, just a bug factory of, midges, calabatus, leeches, water boatmen, and damsels. And then on the other side of Highway 97, there's another mountain. It's actually a national monument. It's called Newberry Crater, and it's an old volcano that left two caldera lakes. One is called East Lake, and it's 1,000 acres, and the other one is called Paulina Lake, which is 1,500 acres. And I've actually been fishing East Lake since I was 3 or 4 years old. I can't remember exactly whether it was the summer of 1973 or summer of 1974, but my grandparents went there every summer on their vacation. They had a Prowler trailer that they towed behind their Ford station wagon, and Grandpa had an aluminum boat that he put on the top of the station wagon, and they went every summer for years and years, and started bringing us kids when we were old enough to go with them, and we'd troll around with Ford fenders and spin and glows and catch kokanee and rainbow and keep everything we caught, of course. And I don't think I ever fly fished a lake until sometime in the mid 80s, but since then I've probably put in more time on that lake than any other guide in the region. For many years it was the lake that I kind of adopted as my number one choice. If I had a guide trip, I was taking people to East Lake. It was my number one choice. I've owned the permit to guide the lakes here for about 11 years now, and I actually was able to work for the guy that I bought that permit for a couple of years previous to that purchase. And I'm one of 7 permit holders for the Deschutes National Forest. So that allows us to guide the lakes and the Fall River and the Upper Deschutes River. So it's pretty special. And then the lake just to the west of East Lake, and these lakes are up at almost 6,400 feet in elevation. The lake next to East Lake is called Paulina Lake. And honestly, I hadn't fished Paulina Lake since college, and the time before that, I was a little boy, and I had kind of poo-pooed it for a lot of years, thinking that it just wasn't nearly the lake that East Lake was for a fly angler. And last summer, it was my goal to go out with some buddies and and kind of either reacquaint or learn a couple of brand new spots. And one of the places on that list was Paulina. And so I went just after the 4th of July. I think it was the 5th or 6th of July last year with my friend Ron. And it was a great day off. He took his boat instead of me and mine. So it was just a simple day for me. I didn't have to get the boat ready, the cooler ready, nothing. I just had to bring my rod and a few flies, and I was ready to go. And man, we went around that lake in his little boat, and I was astounded. Not only was I astounded at the fishing, but I was astounded at how wrong I was about the fishery, and thinking that it just wasn't a great fly fishing lake. It is a tremendously good fly fishing lake. And so after that experience last July, I went up a couple more times and made sure I had it kind of, really figured out, making sure that the first day that I went there with Ron wasn't a fluke. And I ended up guiding there almost 30 days last summer. So because East Lake is running a little bit low, we've had at least a couple of years of pretty low snowpack. And East Lake has been running a little bit low. It's harder to launch my bigger boat. And the fishing just hasn't been as good because the water is slightly warmer. Paulina is perfect in every way imaginable. And the fishing has just been outstanding. So it's actually now probably become my favorite of the lakes to guide. And then there's a mountain lake. Well, there's a bunch of mountain lakes right around town here, all within about a half an hour or so. But there's one in particular I'll mention. It's called Three Creeks Lake, and it's about 16 miles up Elm Street from my fly shop. Our fly shop is essentially on the corner of Elm and Main. We're up a couple of buildings away. There's a barber shop and a bakery between us and the corner there. And if you went from our fly shop, turn right on Elm, and went up past the fire station and up about another 16 miles, you would be at the lake. And the last few miles are kind of a bumpy gravel road. I don't love pulling my drift boat on there, but you just slow down and go a little bit slower and ride with it. It's only 3 miles of bump. The rest of the road's paved. And you have this great little, kind of heart-shaped mountain lake right below this amazing ridge that holds snow nearly year-round, called Tam MacArthur Rim. And it's just full of these wild brook trout, ODF and W, stocks rainbows. They get some holdovers, has great hatches. It's just a cool place. And in fact, with this heat that we're having this week, I've actually had my trip today and tomorrow cancel or get postponed to later in the season. And then next week, I'm in the process of either rescheduling all of my trips for next week on the lakes, or moving the stuff that was supposed to be at East Lake or Paulina Lake up to Three Creeks Lake, because it has 3 little streams that run into it. They're coming straight out of the mountains very nearby. I mean, the snowpack that's feeding those streams was like within just a few miles of the lake, and so extremely cold water is feeding into that lake, and it's going to be a totally safe place to actually do a guide trip where I don't have to worry about water temperatures and that 68 and above range, and worrying about killing fish, which I just won't do. I won't go to those lakes again until we get some cooler weather. So it might be a while.
Good. Yeah. This heat, the Pacific Northwest is getting the most attention, but already in California, people are worried about the heat. Montana's had fires already. Idaho, Utah, Colorado, of course. Everybody needs to be mindful of this now.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I think this week the Madison River put in some regulations to deal with the heat. So,
are they going to hoot owl regulations where you can?
I think so. The evening, yeah.
Cut it off at 2:00. Yeah.
So,
well, that's a good idea. I heard that Oregon might experiment with that for the first time here, starting on the 1st of July. So I think they're kind of working on the details of that, and I think it's a really, really good idea.
I do too. Yeah, and I don't know if you saw that there were already concerns about missing brown trout. Missing wasn't their word, but they don't know where brown trout are of a certain size. I can't remember the size, and they're trying to figure that out. So, you know, why wait on keeping these fish healthy? So, or
Yep.
out of
Yep.
out of our harm's way. So.
Yeah. No, we all need to be investing in trout futures, and that means
Nice.
sitting at home and maybe tying flies or reading a favorite fishing book or something for just a couple of weeks or whatever it takes to let the waters get it to a safe level again.
Well put. Well, are there more waters that are worth exploring in your area?
Yeah, I'll tell you about one other really great place. Um, well, no, we talked about Hosmer. Let's just kind of revisit that Hosmer Lake for just a moment, because I'd kind of forgotten that I had started to talk about that, but I think it's of special note, maybe more of a conversation than how I first described it, in that I only said it was a fly fishing only lake and just someplace that was kind of right behind the ski area called Mount Bachelor. So Hosmer is indeed a fly fishing only lake, and is actually kind of two lakes connected with a long channel. And it's very, very popular with the canoe, kayak, and paddleboard crowd in the summertime. So on these nice days, there'll be, you know, hordes and hordes of people that show up there, you know, between 7:30 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and everybody wants to paddle up to where the stream comes in and go through the channel. And if you're there in your you know, pontoon boat or your drift boat, and you're fishing, every single person that comes by on a paddleboard or kayak has to tell you that there's a fish right there. You know, really? And so it's pretty amazing, from the standpoint that at one point Hosmer Lake was originally named Mud Lake, and it got renamed by a Oregon pioneer explorer named Henry Hosmer. And the lake is very shallow, has tons of springs, and it has this stream that runs into it and kind of through it that sort of provides a cold water refuge almost any time of the year. So even today, where the lower lake temperature is probably in the mid 70s, the upper lake temperature would be quite a bit cooler. And if you could find that stream running through there, it'd be even cooler yet. I still wouldn't promote anybody going up there to fish that probably this week or most of next week. But when they started to establish a fishery at Hosmer Lake, it was very curious. ODF&W originally started putting Atlantic salmon in Hosmer Lake, and they were getting these Atlantic salmon from New Brunswick. And the original Atlantic salmon that they got would grow fairly large, but they also like to really hang out close to the surface of the lake. So they became really easy prey for the abundant osprey and eagle population around the upper lakes there. So they changed strains to a different Atlantic salmon that didn't necessarily get as big, but they also didn't like to hang out right at the surface. And so when I first started fishing Hosmer in the mid 80s, Hosmer was almost entirely an Atlantic salmon fishery, with a pretty decent brook trout fishery combined with it. So fast forward to just a few years ago, and ODF&W finally decides that why in the world are we investing all this money at bringing this fish from eastern Canada to a lake in the middle of the mountains in Oregon? Right. And so they finally said, you know, this is getting more and more expensive, and they were shipping eggs over from Canada, and if they got the eggs across the border before they started to hatch, they would cost so much. But if they started to hatch into fish, they would cost them more, and there'd be more paperwork involved. And I think it just became kind of a massive issue for them to deal with. And so they stopped buying these Atlantic salmon from Canada, and they started stocking cutthroat trout in there the first season. And those did really, really well along with the brook trout. And then a couple years later, they decided, let's also try the Crane Prairie stock of rainbows. So anybody that fishes the lakes around here, particularly that Crane Prairie Reservoir that I was talking about, which is part of the Deschutes River, water storage system up in the mountains, knows that the nickname for these incredibly hard fighting and acrobatic and generally large rainbows is called a crane bow. Not a rainbow, but a crane bow. So the ODF&W has kind of capitalized on that crane bow thing, and they use the eggs and the sperm in the hatcheries, and have created a crane bow stock where they can raise them in the hatcheries and then bring them to different lakes in the region, including East Lake and Hosmer. I know for sure that they've stocked crane bows in those two lakes. And so that these crane bows are doing probably better in Hosmer Lake than maybe any other lake in the region. In fact, the first fish of the season that I caught with a guide trip customer back in May was a crane bow, and it was 25 inches long, and it took a little red, 2-bit hooker under a yarn indicator, and oh my word, it was game on, man. So I don't know whether we'll beat that fish for the season or not, but that wasn't a bad way to start the season. So anyway, very, very cool spot. And so I kind of mentioned that I've been working in the fly fishing business actually since 86 was when I started working at the Fly Box in Bend, which is no longer in business, but was a great fly shop. I started hanging out there in 1980 when we moved to Bend and learned how to tie flies and build rods, and then eventually started working there in high school, thanks to a tip from a kid that had his locker next to mine at Bend High School. Said, "Hey, the Fly Box is hiring. You should go down and see if they still need anybody." And so I went that afternoon and was able to secure a job there, which was a shit ton better than the last job that I had, which was loading and unloading buses at the Trailways Bus Depot in downtown Bend, and also selling bus tickets and cleaning up the bus depot, including the bathrooms. So went from that job to working in the fly shop. Dude, I thought I had it so made. And turned out it was a pretty positive career choice for me. Anyway, when I first started to guide, I was 18. And I first started to guide. The owner, my friend Alan Stewart, only let me guide two places: the Fall River and Hosmer Lake. And so the funny thing about it is they also didn't let me drive to guide trips, not even on my own. I couldn't even meet the customers there. They made the customers drive me, and in the case of going to Hosmer, also the float tubes up to the lake. So I have some pretty funny memories from those days. But yeah, those are some pretty cool days. So I've been guiding up at Hosmer since kind of the late 80s and seen a lot of changes. But honestly, I think that it's better now than it was. How often do you get to say that, where you can say, man, that fishery is actually better now than it used to be? And it's 100% true at Hosmer Lake.
That's amazing. That's great to hear. With a couple of the waters you mentioned, seasons, for those who are thinking about heading up there and wanting to plan a trip, what are some seasonal considerations?
Yeah, so I read, like you and I have talked about this heat dome that's over the top of us, and who knows whether or not this is ever going to happen again. I mean, in our lifetime, for Central Oregon, this is a rarity. I read in the Washington Post today that this is kind of a once in 1,000-year event. If you look back at records that have been taken, in the region, we just haven't seen too many events like this that have been a longevity like this. Yeah, we get 100-degree days or 101 or 102 around here, but this is odd. So normally I would say this time of year is a great time to come. And for the visiting angler, it used, God, Tim, used to be sisters sisters would get so quiet in November and then especially in January and February. And it's just kind of a few local people out fishing. But we're seeing, Bend is growing in population. Sisters growing a little bit. It can't grow like Bend can. It's just got no area to grow into. But there's a lot more people fishing here year round for sure, and the fishing here year round is pretty darn good, minus the weird weather that we could get from time to time, and that could happen in February or July or June. If you really press me on when the best fishing is, I would say probably May 15th to about July 1st, and then probably from about September 1st until about October 15th. If I was planning to come to the area, knowing what I know, let's say I moved away, I moved to Tasmania and wanted to come back and visit, then that would be the times that I would probably focus on, because I know what's happening at that time. I know the hatches. I know that the consistency of the weather overall. Yeah, you might be dressing for some cold days on the water, but not terribly cold, not unfishably cold. I mean, it's funny. I cleaned out my truck a couple of days ago. The back seat of the Nissan Titan that I pulled the boat with and guide people out of almost every day. And just, it was crazy that I was pulling out a Patagonia puffy jacket and a Sims puffy vest and a Patagonia stocking hat. They were in the back seat from just a week and a half ago.
Right. And
here we are at I'm looking at my watch right now. It's 102 outside. So that I was wearing Primaloft pants with Sims Gore-Tex bibs over the top of them, and a Sims Bulkley jacket, which is their bomber, insulated jacket with a Gore-Tex shell, and a stocking hat, and taking gloves on and off depending on whether I was running the motor or handling fish, off with the fish and on with the motor. I mean, it's crazy that was just like less than 2 weeks ago, and I was wearing that shit, and now we're sweltering.
That is crazy.
So, yeah.
A question that I just can't help but ask, because it comes up a lot in the fly fishing community, and then you can see signs of it visually when driving at least up 5 through Northern California.
Yep.
A lot of conversation about Bigfoot.
Bigfoot. Well, I mean, I honestly I haven't seen him yet, but I'm sure that there's been some nights that I've heard some howling, where he's been around. So got to be close. I know the dogs get, one of the dogs gets her hackles up and stuff from time to time when we're out in the woods. So yeah, I think it's definitely a possibility. Probably goes a little deeper into the woods, a little higher elevation this time of year, but you never know. Could be heading down towards the Metolius, getting a sip out of that cold, clean water.
Well, if Bigfoot isn't real, the culture up there of Bigfoot being real is a lot of fun.
Yeah,
there was
for sure.
There was one town en route, and I can't remember what it was, through some pretty thick timber where you roll in and it's Bigfoot stuff everywhere. But
yeah. Honestly, how could you say that Bigfoot's not real? I suppose you're also anti-Santa Claus and Easter Bunny too. Right. I mean, come on, you bastard! What's the matter with you, Tim?
That's funny. Well, great. Where you mentioned the Fly Fisher's Place, your business and your guide service. It's a fly shop as well, and the people can learn more at theflyfishersplace.com, on Facebook at the Fly Fisher's Place, Instagram. I'm sorry, Facebook at Fly Fisher's Place, Instagram at the Fly Fisher's Place. But tell us more about the Fly Fisher's Place.
Yeah. So it's a neat business. I think it has a really, really good vibe, a great culture. The people, the men and women that have worked there or do work there, all love fly fishing, tend to have very, very little snobby, unhelpful attitude. Like we're all really, really into kind of the friendly service. We have, a great guide staff that just love what they do. I think they, from what I've heard, they get paid, better than most around the region, and that makes them happy. And they get a lot of trips. And we have a small shop that's like about 1,400 square feet. That's it's packed to the gills with everything that any big fly shop would have. It just is kind of put together in a really quaint way. You get a lot of people that come in and go, man, this is a cool fly shop, or this is my favorite fly shop, or this fly shop has by far the best fly selection I've ever seen. One of the things that I do, about 99% of the buying, particularly the preseason buying. Our manager, Brad, does a lot of the kind of the day-to-day fill-in buying throughout the season and off season now. But one of the things that I love when the reps come in is the fly buying part of it. And while it's a ton of work to kind of forecast, what flies to have and when to bring them in and how many you should get. I'm a total fly geek, like I just, you might have got that in our conversation when I started talking about the Metolius. You could see I kind of got a little dreamy when we were talking about hatches, and I love looking at a new emerger and going, yeah, that profile, I dig that. I can see putting that on, and throwing it over the fish. I think they're going to really like that. And so I look at fly purchases in that way, and in a way that is that gonna fool the fish on my technical waters? Is that fly going to be something that that a beginner could easily track on the water? Is that fly something that is just so different that nobody else is going to have it, and the fish are going to go, whoa, I got to eat it, And so we sell a lot of flies, and we sell a lot of really cool patterns. I mean, of course we have the basics, but there's probably not too many fly shops in the entire state, let alone the whole Pacific Northwest, that has the different types of emergers and cripples, and including caddis and mayflies and midges and stuff like that we have. I mean, it's just, I love flies, so I'm a total fly geek. And we got a ton of fly line and leader and tippet, because in the end, we know who we are. We know that we're a trout shop. I mean, yeah, we have steelhead in the area, we have bass in the area, we host a saltwater trip or two every year, and we have some stuff, we have an inventory for those people. But we know at the essence that the Fly Fisher's Place is a trout shop that caters to trout fishermen, and trout anglers, because we have a lot of women clientele and we love them equally. And it's just like, yeah, we're a trout shop, so that's what we have. We have a ton of leaders and tippet and rods and lines, and especially flies that are going to cater to that type of angler.
Well, terrific. Jeff, I appreciate you coming on. And again, those out there who are listening, check out Jeff Perin and the Fly Fisher's Place online, and especially on social media. There's always cool things happening there. And Jeff, thanks again.
Thanks, Tim. Super fun.